In this video, we're going to talk about metabolism. This is going to be our first video on energy in AP biology. So we know that food webs are how energy is transferred from one level to the next. So we know that most energy comes from the sun, and the sun converts that some of that energy is converted by the producers, like plants, through photosynthesis into food. And then some of that energy is transferred on to the primary consumers when they feed on the plants or the producers. And then some of the energy is transferred on to the secondary consumers as they eat the primary consumers, and so on up the food chain. So that energy has to get into the cell in order for the cell to do its thing. We'll talk more about the form of energy that happens in a future video. But all the work of a living thing happens in the cell. So we need to take the energy they get either through photosynthesis or cell respiration to do the work that cells need to do in order for the organism to do its thing. So we know that life is built on chemical reactions, and chemical reactions require energy. One type of reactions we'll talk about are the transforming energy reactions, where energy is transferred from one form to another. You know, we can't create energy, but we can change its form. So sunlight is one form of energy. The energy from sunlight is converted into things like ATP and organic molecules or food by the producers through photosynthesis. Some of those organic molecules then are going to be transferred on to the next level by the feeding of the primary consumers on the plants. And they take those organic molecules, that food, and they convert it into ATP and other organic molecules. And they get transferred on up the food chain from level to level as different things feed on different things. Remember, the trophic levels or feeding levels are the different parts of the food chain. So metabolism is all the chemical reactions of life. It's all the reactions that a living thing needs to do to stay alive. It involves forming bonds between molecules as well as breaking bonds. Forming bonds happens through what's called dehydration synthesis, where a bond is formed and water is given off as a byproduct. These are anabolic reactions. Anabolic means to build larger molecules from simpler subunits. That's why we call anabolic steroids. The name comes from the fact that it's used to build muscles. There's also breaking bonds between molecules. Hydrolysis, where water is added in and used to split the bonds. Digestion is a form of this. These are catabolic reactions where larger molecules are broken down into smaller subunits. Energy is a part of all of this. It takes energy to form bonds, and energy is given off when bonds are broken. So here's an example of a dehydration synthesis reaction. Hydrolysis looks kind of like this. Now, all of these reactions require enzymes, which we'll talk about later. Whether it's dehydration synthesis or hydrolysis, the enzyme speeds up the reactions and allows the reactions to occur at a fast enough rate for living things to stay alive. So here's some more specific examples of dehydration synthesis and hydrolysis. You can see the enzymes play roles in those. Some chemical reactions release energy. These are called exergonic reactions. Energy is exiting from the reaction. Digesting polymers would be an example of an exergonic reaction. Metabolism. So in an exergonic reaction, the products have less energy than the reactants. Some chemical reactions require an input of energy. In fact, most of them do. If energy is absorbed in the reaction, it's called an endergonic reaction. Building polymers would be an example of this, dehydration synthesis. In these types of reactions, the the products have more energy than the reactants do. So here's a graph kind of showing you the differences here. First graph shows an exergonic reaction. The reactants have more energy than the product's energy is released. You can see delta G, or Gibbs free energy, there's a negative change in the amount of energy. So delta G has to do with the ability to do work, the energy to do work. So if delta G goes down, there's less ability to do work. In an endergonic reaction, the products have more energy, so energy has to be inputted into the reaction, and delta G is going to be positive. So energy is one of the requirements for life. All living things need energy to do the things that those living things do. So the energy comes from coupling reactions. We couple an exergonic reaction, where energy is released, with an endergonic reaction, one that needs energy. So when something is broken down, that energy is used to build something else, basically. So digestion, energy is given off. Synthesis, energy is used. You can see how the energy flows in that coupled reaction.